I was sitting at my desk last Sunday, feeling guilty. Not because I was working, because I wasn't. You know that feeling? That low-grade anxiety when you try to rest, like you're secretly breaking some ancient law. I used to think that guilt came from somewhere deep, religious, biological, like humans were designed for 6 days of labor and 1 of stillness, and my body knew it even if my mind didn't. But here's the part that kept me up that night. The weekend isn't ancient. It's not in the Bible, not the way you think. It's not in Roman law. It's not carved into our DNA. In fact, the 2-day weekend as you understand it is younger than sliced bread. Literally. Sliced bread was invented in 1928. The weekend, in anything resembling its current form, arrived around the same time. And if you're feeling a little defensive right now, good. I did too. Because the story of how we got it, and why we're now losing it, is not the story you've been told. I need you to picture something. Not a factory, not an office. Picture a medieval village, maybe 600 years ago. A peasant named Thomas. You probably imagine Thomas as exhausted, broken by labor, desperate for a weekend that doesn't exist yet. But Thomas worked about 150 days a year. The church mandated roughly 60 feast days, plus saints' days, plus the month off after harvest. Thomas didn't need a weekend because his time wasn't divided into weeks at all. It was divided by tasks, seasons, and sermons. There was no Saturday, there was no Sunday. There was only after the planting and before the fair. The ancient Romans didn't have weekends either. They had an 8-day market cycle. The Babylonians gave us the 7-day week, but they didn't give us the weekend. They gave us astrology and a number. Even the Sabbath, the Jewish day of rest, the Christian Lord's Day, was 1 day, not 2. A pause, yes, but not a weekend. The very word weekend doesn't appear in English until the 1870s, and when it first showed up, it was treated with suspicion. Religious leaders called it the English disease. They thought 2 consecutive days off would lead to idleness, drunkenness, and moral collapse. So when did rest become a right? And when did it shrink from 150 scattered days to 2 consecutive ones? Stay with me here, because this is where I started feeling uneasy. To understand the weekend, you have to understand something most historians skip over. We didn't invent rest. We invented the opposite of rest first. We invented work. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people didn't have jobs. They had crafts, trades, seasons. The word job as we use it, this thing you go to, this separate sphere from your home, your family, your soul, that concept barely existed before 1800. Then came the factory whistle, and with it, something unprecedented. Clock time, not task time, not work until the barrel is finished, work until the bell rings. E.P. Thompson, the historian, called this the transition from task orientation to time discipline, and it broke something in the human psyche that we're still trying to repair. By the 1880s, American factory workers were pulling 60, 70, sometimes 100-hour weeks, 6 days, sometimes 7, and here's where the story gets politically weird. You probably think the weekend was won by radicals, socialists with banners, and yes, labor unions fought for it, brutally at times. The Haymarket affair in 1886, the 8-hour-day movement, the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America. They marched, struck, some died for it. But the first major company to standardize the 5-day week wasn't pressured by a strike. It was Ford Motor Company, 1926. Henry Ford didn't give his workers Saturday off because he was kind. He gave it to them because he was selling cars, and a worker who works 6 days a week has no time to drive. No time to consume, no time to become the customer his own factory needed. The weekend wasn't a gift, it was a market correction. And yet, here's what genuinely changed how I think about this. Without the unions, Ford would never have felt the pressure to make that correction. The weekend sits at this strange intersection, a worker's demand answered by a capitalist self-interest, a religious impulse absorbed by economic necessity. I know that sounds cynical, but the story gets stranger. But I need to stop here and tell you something I almost left out of this video. Because when I first started researching this, I wanted it to be simple. I wanted to say, unions fought, workers won, we got the weekend, capitalism tried to steal it back. That's a satisfying story. I wish it were true. The real story is messier, and it has to do with something happening inside your brain right now. You see, the weekend didn't just create rest. It created a boundary, a hard line between production and existence. And neurologically, that boundary is not a luxury, it's a requirement. You're probably thinking, okay, rest is good. I know this. Why does this matter? It matters because rest is not the same thing as a weekend. Neuroscientists at the University of York found that creative insight, that moment when a problem suddenly makes sense, doesn't happen during concentration. It happens during what they call incubation. Specifically, during periods when your prefrontal cortex stops trying to control the outcome, when you stop working. But here's the crucial part. Incubation requires a signal that work is over, not just fatigue, a boundary. When work bleeds into every hour of your life, when you check email on Saturday, when your phone is a portable factory, your brain never receives that signal. You are resting without recovering. Researchers call this the always-on brain. Your default mode network, the part of your brain that processes memory, identity, and imagination, needs sustained disengagement to function. Not a nap between meetings, not a Sunday afternoon half watching a show while answering Slack. It needs a threshold, a door that closes. The weekend, in other words, was never just about hours. It was about architecture, a structure that told your nervous system, this is yours, this is not theirs. And that brings me to the theological twist that genuinely surprised me. God commanded rest, the Sabbath, 1 day in 7, but notice what he didn't command. He didn't command Saturday and Sunday. He didn't command a weekend. He commanded a rhythm, a pause, and for most of human history, that pause was woven into the fabric of life, not scheduled at the end of a work week that didn't exist yet. The weekend is a secular invention that hijacked a religious impulse and turned it into an economic rhythm. 2 days, not because God asked for 2, but because 1 day wasn't enough to both recover from industrial labor and consume industrial products. The weekend is a compromise between the human need for rest and the market's need for consumption. And now it's dissolving. Remote work, gig apps, the side hustle, the 10 p.m. Friday notification. We are returning to pre-industrial time blur, but without the community, the feast days, or the seasonal logic that made pre-industrial life sustainable. We work like medieval peasants, constantly, reactively, without boundaries, but we have none of their idle time. The average American today works more hours than a medieval serf, with less communal rest, and we call it freedom. I can't stop thinking about that. Last weekend, I caught myself opening my laptop at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. Not because I had to, because the quiet felt wrong, like a mistake. And I realized the factory whistle stopped ringing a century ago, but it never actually left my head. So no, the weekend was not invented by God. It was invented by labor unions, industrialists, and a strange economic calculus that realized humans need to rest just enough to keep buying. But here's what I keep coming back to. If the weekend is only 100 years old, that means it's fragile. It means it was negotiated, not discovered. And if it was negotiated once, it can be renegotiated. But only if we understand what we actually need. We don't need 2 days off. We need a signal, a boundary, a place where the factory whistle stops and something else begins. The medieval peasant had it through the church calendar. The factory worker had it through Saturday and Sunday. And you? You're probably watching this on a device that erased the boundary entirely. The question isn't whether you'll take a weekend. The question is, who owns your time when you're not looking? Here's what I want you to do. Not a subscription, not a like, just an experiment. For the next 7 days, actually notice, every time you feel that low-grade Sunday guilt. That sense you should be working, producing, optimizing. Don't fight it. Name it. Write it down. At the end of the week, look at your list and ask, whose voice is that? Yours? Or a factory whistle that stopped ringing a century ago but never left your head? If you do this, I genuinely want to know what you find. Because I think we're all carrying around an anxiety that was manufactured before we were born. And the first step toward getting our time back is realizing it was never God's idea in the first place.